In this video, we are going to take the basic strokes that we learned and practiced and learn how we put those together in order to form letters to create that alphabet that we know and love. And again, you can find that workbook in the link below and download as many copies as you'd like to practice through as much as you want. Just remember, you're not rushing to get through the page. You just want to make sure that you are taking your time and practicing these strokes and how they space together to form these letters. And let's get started. If you watched my last video, then you would have practiced all of the basic strokes that now we're going to be putting together to form letters. So I've written them separately so that you can see, and if you want to trace over in the guide within my page that I've linked to in the description. Now for the A, we start with that entry stroke, then we go into the oval where we start on the right, bring that heavy downstroke around and curve and transition to finish that oval. And then we go into the underturn. So notice it starts on the top line and not where it connects with the oval. So think about them as separate pieces and those separate strokes that you're just going to start mashing in a little bit closer together. And so again, we go from the entry stroke into an oval, and then starting back at our line, we're going to go into the underturn. So notice when I do my entry stroke, I don't go all the way up here. It's just because I'm moving into an oval that doesn't necessarily hit the line right at the top. So this is where I was saying part 3, thinking about what we're doing and thinking ahead a little bit. So if I know I've got an oval, I'm going to maybe not bring my entry stroke as high. Here we're going to start with an entry stroke where we then go into an ascending loop. And then we're going to do that same oval, but we're going to do it backwards. So I started on the left side with that thin stroke, went to transition into the heavy downstroke and around. So we had entry stroke, that ascending loop, and then here I start on the left side with that thin line, and then I transition into a thicker downstroke, keep it going around in that curve, and then I finish out that oval by having a thin upstroke again. It's the same as the oval as we did within our basic strokes, except that we're just turning it in the other direction. So you'll see we're going to take a lot of the basic strokes that we're doing today or that we've practiced already, and we might just change them a little bit depending on some of the letters. As we move into the C, we have that entry stroke, and we essentially have an oval that we're just not going to connect at the end here. It's just going to go straight up into the next line to give you your exit stroke, basically to move into the next letter. So we start on the right with a thin upstroke, and then we connect it by going into a heavy downstroke, and then instead of finishing and closing off that oval, I'm just going to bring that thin upstroke straight up to the next line to act as my exit or entry stroke for the next letter when I start to connect these letters. So as we're making each of these letters, we're thinking about the future when we're going to be connecting them by having entry and exit strokes. So for the T, entry stroke, the oval just as we normally know it, and then this time we're going to have an ascending loop, but when we finish it at the bottom, we're going to think about transitioning out towards directly into our exit stroke. So we have a thin upstroke, then we start on the right side with our thin upstroke and go heavy downstroke to connect our oval, and we finish out that oval, and then I want to think about making that ascending loop where it's going to meet that oval, and at the end I'm just going to lift my pen to transition and go up into the exit stroke, thinking about moving into my next letter for the future. Transitioning at the bottom and then finishing out with an exit stroke. Here, this is the way I've seen it done and kind of how I learned it for more pointed pen and things like that, but you're essentially going to do a C and then close it out for the E. There are other easier ways where you could start that E where it would connect and how you would normally more traditionally do an E. This is just kind of good practice for if you're going to do other types of lettering, a little bit of a habit to try. So I didn't do it perfectly here in this practice, and you'll probably struggle a little bit with it too in the beginning, as you can see. It's just something that's kind of a good habit to do, but if you end up kind of writing it a little bit more like your traditional E, it's going to look just fine in brush lettering. But again, I'm more just trying this out for practice. For things like using a pointed pen or doing it in a different way that you would actually want to, because it changes the shape and form of the E for a more traditional sense. For the F, we have the entry stroke, then we go into the ascending loop, which we're also going to end up having a descending loop, and then finishing with an exit stroke. When I put it together, it'll end up being one big line, but I just want you to see that you can take the ascending loop and then also do a descending loop here that's going to go forward and coming out. So there, I kind of did them as separate bits, but you can see how that line is a bit funky. So when you put it together, you'll go into the ascending loop. That'll just go heavy downstroke straight into the descending loop that's going to come forward. And then we're just going to finish out with an exit stroke to start to think about getting ready for connecting these letters when we make words. On page 2 of our alphabet, we move into the G, where we have an entry stroke, that same oval that we've been practicing and I struggled with for a really long time. And then we're finishing out in a descending loop and finally an exit stroke. So we take a nice entry stroke, again, not really meeting the line because I know I have an oval coming up here. And then finishing out the oval, and then starting at the top line, come down into my descending loop, start to transition it by curving it a little bit and lifting the pressure, and then finishing on the exit stroke. Here we go into oval, and descending loop, where as I transition on the bottom and start to release pressure, I shift my pen, and then finish out with the exit stroke. So notice each of these letters are not just one fell motion, I'm lifting and changing as I go. As we move into the H now, we'll go entry stroke, ascending loop, and then we add in that compound curve. So making sure you do the separate bits, because seeing them as a full letter, I know you just want to go right into our normal habits of writing the letter as we do, but think about it as separate strokes that we're just putting together. So that ascending loop still starts at the bottom. I'm not meeting the line of the ascending loop to start that H. It's still starting right at the bottom as the separate stroke as it would be. Instead of just saying, oh, I have this descending loop and I'm just going to connect that line directly on the H. Start at the bottom, keep it in the stroke as you normally would do it separately. Moving into the I, pretty simple, it's just the entry stroke, then we go into an underturn, and then finish out by adding the dot. So this is nice and easy because we get to meet the lines here, come down into the underturn where we need to transition at the bottom, and then curve into our upstroke. And then the J is fairly similar. We have entry stroke, and then we go directly into a descending loop, and then we finish with an exit stroke. Entry, descending loop, and then the exit stroke. That transition at the bottom is where you probably want to spend the most time, is releasing that pressure as you transition and curve the bottom of your J and move into an upstroke. But lift your pen often. As you get practice and get a lot better, you might have to do this a lot less, but in the beginning, it's just really good practice to lift often, and it's a good reminder for you mentally too. into the K. Now with all of these letters, there's several ways to do them. These are just some of the basic ways. And with brush lettering, I always say just learn one basic set and then start to find variations and try those out in the future. I like these because these follow along with the basic strokes really easily and you're not changing too much. So with this, we started with an entry stroke, then we went into an ascending loop. From there, we brought it up a thin upstroke and then just curved it down. And as I went down for the top of the K, I go heavy here on that pressure. And then I'm going to meet the line and pretty much do like a half compound curve. So I start at the line and I kind of do that compound curve and then turn my pen vertical for a thin upstroke to exit out of that K. The L is essentially just an ascending loop, except that at the bottom, we know that we want to transition directly into an exit stroke. So from there, I just, instead of finishing with a hard line, I'm going to curve it at the bottom, make my pen a bit more vertical, and then go thin on an upstroke to finish out the bottom. So you're almost taking an ascending loop and then kind of combining an underturn. For the M, we're just combining two overturns where we're going to go thin up, heavy down, and then we're going to add a compound curve at the end so that we get to that exit stroke. So we have underturn, thin upstroke, heavy down, bringing that downstroke in close to where we started the upstroke instead of straight down, so it's going to curve down. And then we finish off with a compound curve, and I'm lifting and transitioning my pen between each of these upstrokes and downstrokes. And notice I'll start at the bottom and not just at the line where the first overturn finished. Starting at the bottom so that I'm hitting each of those strokes. Then we move over onto the third page where we'll go into N, and very similar, except you're just going to have one overturn and then one compound curve. So we go one overturn, thin upstroke, transition, follow, bringing it down for a heavy downstroke, and then starting right at the bottom, I go up, down into that compound curve, and then curve transition at the end, turn my brush on my brush pen, and then make sure I get vertical to finish the bottom at the end of the compound curve, as you'll see here. Vertical and then thin upstroke to finish out that end. Then we go into the O, which is nice and easy because it's pretty much just the oval shape, so that entry stroke doesn't go quite all the way to the top. And then we finish out the O. To move into our next stroke though, we'll basically take a little mini underturn and we'll just start it at the connection of the O. So it also helps because when you're connecting your O, if you don't meet it perfectly or it looks a little off like that, you could start your mini little underturn or exit stroke from that right there, and you can hide some of your mistakes. I tend to, I practice a bit and I'm fairly decent, but I still tend to make a lot of mistakes, and you'll learn other ways and techniques to kind of cover up some of your mistakes. If you check my website, I also have a blog post about common mistakes. For the P, we have the entry stroke, one nice solid thick downstroke all the way down, and then we go into that oval that's going to go backwards again. So similar to that B, we're going to start on the left side and a thin upstroke, heavy down to finish out the oval, and then exit stroke. So nice, long, straight downstroke, and then starting on the left side on that oval, we're going to go around, heavy downstroke, and then lift again at the bottom to finish out and close the oval. From the edge of that is when we'll add that exit stroke here. So again, just make sure that you're not just trying to meet the line, but you're actually trying to complete that oval and come around into the end of the circle here. And then exit stroke. To move into Q, we have the entry stroke, the normal oval as we know it, starting on the right, transition and press down, and then transition at the bottom to a thinner upstroke and close it out. Then we've got that descending loop that's going out forward instead of curving in, and then we have an exit stroke. So entry stroke, start your oval to the right, heavy downstroke, and then release pressure to close out the oval. And if you make some mistakes, you can still fix them. And go to the descending loop that's going to be facing outward instead. So transitioning on that thin upstroke, I made my pen more vertical after I finished that heavy downstroke and transitioned it to curve. Now for the R, I gave two variations because this can be a little bit funky, but essentially you want to have that thin upstroke and you want to start it higher, and then from there we'll kind of go down and finish out with the end of a compound curve. So if you lift here and go all the way up, then from the start of that you can go into almost like a thicker downstroke that moves towards the right here, and then stop and start the end of either the end of a compound curve, or you can say it as an underturn here, right? If you want to, for design, you can make that loop there, but think about kind of going straight up, and then the way you bring that down on that heavy downstroke is going to really kind of make the difference on your R here. And then at the very end, just finishing it like an underturn or the end of your compound curve. Another way for you to do your R is to do that thin upstroke, just a heavy downstroke, a thin upstroke that curves the other way, and then basically a mini little underturn. So we have thin upstroke, then we have just one heavy downstroke, kind of like we practiced in the beginning. Then we do that upstroke curving the other way, and then finish out with a mini underturn at the end. And those are your two variations on R's. Again, all of the letters have tons of variations, but these were ones that I liked to use that were very in line with the basic strokes. Now the S is going to be similar. You're going to go kind of above, and if you want to add that curve at the top, you can. You want to think about giving that heavy downstroke at towards the bottom, and then transitioning the bottom of your S. Now with the entry stroke, I tend to move a little bit more angled on that entry stroke so that I can go a little bit more vertical down on the downstroke for the S. And then when I get to the bottom, I just want to lift and transition a little bit here, and then finish out that loop to come into our exit stroke. For the T, fairly simple entry stroke, and then you've got a nice long downstroke that's going to curve and transition out, almost like your underturn, or thinking of it the way we have finished out the L, where you're going to have a heavy downstroke and then right at the bottom transition to go directly into your next exit stroke. So instead of it being a straight line and then an exit stroke through, you're just going to combine that together here, thinking about kind of that underturn. For the U, similar to our M and N, we're going to have an entry stroke, but this time we're going to do the underturn instead of the overturn, and we're going to just put together two underturns. And those two underturns are going to make our U. Underturn, light upstroke, and then start the next one right next to the one you just finished, and that is our U. For the V, very similar. You can make it a little bit wider at the top here so that there's a little bit of differentiation for your V, or if you still were to keep it the same as your underturn with the U, you can, but what we're going to do is change that exit stroke. So instead of it being another full underturn, you're going to kind of have that mini one that we did with the O. So you'll have underturn and then basically a mini underturn, and that'll be your distinction for your V. And as I said, if you want to stylize it a little bit more and make the top wider or a little bit more pointed on towards the bottom of that underturn, you can. But just remember that heavy downstroke and start to get thin on your upstroke. The W is essentially a combination, so you're going to do two underturns after you get the entry stroke, and then one mini underturn as well for your exit stroke on the W. So we go entry stroke into an underturn, and then starting the next one right at the top of where we finished the other one. So yeah, you'll go over it a little bit, and that's okay, but make sure to finish that stroke all the way through, because that'll just give that cleanliness in each of the letters as you've done them. And notice I'm lifting often still. I'm not just writing these out. I've practiced enough where maybe I could and still get some of that thickness, but I actually do prefer to lift it a lot because it does tend to change, especially the thinness of my upstrokes. With the X, we're just going into a compound curve, which we've practiced plenty here. So just doing a compound curve, and we're just going to do a light upstroke to finish and cross out that X. And then to go into Y, we have our entry stroke. Then we go into an underturn, and again, finish out that full underturn. Even though your descending loop is going to cross through a lot, make sure to finish that through. So entry stroke, finishing out our full underturn here. And then we start at the line to bring it down into our descending loop. Then upstroke, and then we finish out with an exit stroke so that we can move into the next letter. We're going to finish out with the Z here at the end. The next bit that we're going to go into after this video is starting to connect these letters, and we'll do them in order because you'll just start to get a feel for connecting each letter. Now with the Z, this one's a bit funky because we kind of mix the strokes here. So we have entry stroke, and then from here you're going to kind of go into that half oval with your O, or your but facing the other way. And then we're going to kind of combine a descending loop here. But just think about when you're doing those downstrokes. So go in your oval, heavy on the downstroke, lift, and then down heavy again. And then we're going to change the position of our pen to finish with thin upstrokes to close out the Z. So as I said, we'll connect these letters together in the next video, and you'll start to see how those entry and exit strokes become important and what you need to think about ahead as you start connecting letters. Good luck.